Oh God, I almost tripped on the stairs. Jeez. Hi, how's everybody doing tonight? Of course, I called out that I almost tripped on the stairs. I'm sure nobody noticed, but now you all know, so. My name is Aidan Flax-Clark. I work here at the library, putting together Live from NYPL, and I want to say hello to everyone who's here, of course, and everyone who's watching online. There are a lot of things that you can do with your time, so I'm really grateful that you chose to spend it with us. Tonight, I have the very distinct honor of speaking with two writers whose work I admire so immensely, Beth Macy and Andrea Elliott. Beth is here to talk about her most recent book, Raising Lazarus, Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis. It's the follow-up to her incredible 2018 book, Dopesick, which, among other things, was adapted into an excellent series on Hulu, and more importantly for us here at the library, was a finalist in 2019 for the New York Public Library's Bernstein Award. The Helen Bernstein Book Award for Excellence in Journalism was established in 1987 through a gift from Joseph Frank Bernstein in honor of journalist Helen Bernstein Feely. And for the past 35 years, the library has selected 5 finalists for it, and it recognizes books written by working journalists that raise awareness about current events or issues of global or national significance. And this year's winner of the Bernstein Award was our other guest, Andrea Elliott, author of the amazing Invisible Child. Let's give her a round of applause. Both of their books are remarkable, and I can't wait to hear more about them. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about the Bernstein Award. Bernstein finalists are selected by a 10-person library review committee, which reads over 100 books submitted by publishers. I used to sit on that committee, and it is brutal work, let me tell you. But I can tell you that both Beth and Andrea's books really exemplify the best of what you get when you sit on that committee, which to me are books that are kind of soul-crushing, but that you can't put down. A great Bernstein book, shines light on unseen people and experiences and reveals difficulties and painful truths about our fellow human beings that we need to know about, even if we don't want to sometimes. I don't know if there are any committee members or judges here in the room tonight. Wow, Ian, and I can't see who else is there, but Tara, we have 2 committee members here. If we can give them a round of applause. It's rough work. It's very brutal, but also very fulfilling, I have to say. So you can learn more about the Bernstein Award by going to nypl.org/Bernstein. Invisible Child and Raising Lazarus are both available for purchase out here. If you're watching online, you can buy it from our shop online. There should be a link in the chat now or coming any second. Beth and Andrea will both sign their books afterwards. And whichever way you purchase, proceeds go to benefit the library. Of course, you can also get them with your library card, which I am positive I don't have to shame anyone about not having here, right? Everyone has a library card, yes? I can't really see you, but I'll know. I will know. Live from NYPL has a bunch of other great events coming up. On Thursday, on an online-only event, for all the nerds like myself, we have N.K. Jemisin and LeVar Burton together talking about Nora's new book, which is an amazing book, and it's an amazing conversation. Next week, on November 9th, Joyce DiDonato, Bill Goldstein, and Ruth Franklin are going to offer readings, performance, and conversation to highlight the new Met Opera production of The Hours, as well as the new library exhibition, Virginia Woolf, A Modern Mind. On November 16th, another Pulitzer Prize winner, Joshua Cohen, joins Rivka Galchen and Ruby Namdar to discuss the life and work of the great Israeli writer Abi Yeshua. And there's a lot more, so to go to see what else we have, to register, go to nypl.org/live. Okay, one last quick thing before we get started. You will have seen in the room that you have note cards on your seats. These are for the asking of questions. Please write them at any time that inspiration sparks. There will be people coming around the room to collect them. For my sake, please write them legibly. I will be very grateful. If you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat, or you can email publicprograms@nypl.org, and we will make sure that those get come up here as well. This program is made possible by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you, all of our wonderful supporters here in the room, watching online, and everywhere else. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for being here, and let's give a round of applause for Beth Macy and Andrea Elliott. very bright up here, just so you know. So if you see us squinting, that's why. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for introducing us. We can't stop talking. We have so many questions for each other.
I mean, you can start if you got a question you want to keep, please.
Well, there is the spy pen. She has a spy pen. Tell them what the spy pen is. This is the coolest thing.
Yeah, let's tell it. It sounds cool. I got to know.
I didn't bring it on stage, but it's a pen that records audio at the same time as it writes. And what it's recording is time-stamped onto the page. And this is just like, we were just deep in the weeds really geeking out. But it may not seem very exciting to you guys, but for me, it's like better than, I don't know, anything. So basically, you can interview someone for hours and have little codes that you write to yourself. And then if you know those codes, you can go back instead of listening to the whole thing and tap on the asterisk is my particular thing. And it goes to that part of the interview and starts talking to the pen.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. So
I'm
Dasani
ordering one before I get home tonight.
Did you use this
Yes.
on Invisible Child?
Yes, because I was undercover for the first year. It's not really the right word, but I was really trying to keep my project a secret. So, except for to the people that I was interviewing, so they knew it was running, and so it was a very discreet way to keep tabs on stuff and have recordings happening without showing my notebook to anyone.
That's amazing. I am one of my if there's time questions was going to be what are some surprising tools that you use
We just
doing
cut
your
right
reporting? Are there other? Do you have any weird like pickaxes or something that you?
I have this thing called Wizard Wall. Do you know about Wizard
No.
Wall? Oh my God! So it's a whiteboard. It's it's a movable whiteboard. It looks like a large piece of rolling wrapping paper. It's white and shiny, and it static clings to the wall. So if you're like, you can sketch your whole book out, and then if you go to like, say, a writing colony or something, or you're going to work somewhere else, you could just take it, and it'll static cling to the wall, and it's dry erase.
So I had a board that I lugged around that folded into, it was like an accordion. But this sounds much better. This is all we could talk about for the next hour is our tools at the tree.
Pens, pencils, sticky notes.
I'm going to feel bad asking you both this boring question after that because that was fascinating. But I do feel it's incumbent on me to ask for anyone who's watching here or online who isn't familiar with one or the other of your books, if you both would mind just giving a sort of a brief description of what each of your books is. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you could start, Beth.
Sure. Raising Lazarus is a follow-up to Dopesick, which came out in 2018 and was really about the origins of the opioid crisis and all the barriers that the typical person with opioid use disorder faces. And it was so depressing, honestly. But at the end of the book, the main person I had been following was murdered after not being able to access evidence-based treatment over and over and over again. And I was like, I'm never writing about this again. And my husband's like, you should write a cookbook. and then I went around the country talking about the book, and I started to hear about these innovative things. And I started to feel a little bit of hope. And with the opioid settlement monies about to come down, we thought that this was a good time to have a book about what does work. And so especially this concept of harm reduction, which I find to be incredibly hopeful. All the people in the book are super cool and innovative and improvise, overcome, adapt all the time. So if we could scale them up at a scale to match the crisis, we could really do something. So that's what this book is about.
And what is harm reduction?
Harm reduction is the concept of, you've probably heard of needle exchanges, fentanyl test strips. It's this idea of we're going to go to you, you're still in chaotic use, maybe even, and we're going to be okay with that. And we're going to try to get you connected with systems of care, because most people with opioid use disorder are without any connection to systems of care, largely because they've been so stigmatized and unable to get evidence-based care because we don't offer universal health care, because we follow the AA model of abstinence only is the only kind of real recovery, And Andrea and I were just talking about how deadly that can be to many people. And so harm reduction is, I'm going to get you on this buprenorphine, for instance, this medication, but even if you relapse in the next week, I'm still going to see you and treat you like a human being with a treatable medical condition.
Yeah, and the people you document doing that labor they're just remarkable. I mean, meeting people where they are, is a common phrase, and the type of intimacy that they develop and the pain they have to suffer when it doesn't work out, or the stress they endure just by doing the work. I mean, it's truly heroic.
Yes, they're angels.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea, maybe you could tell us about Invisible Child.
Invisible Child is the story of a girl named Dasani Coates, who I followed as she grew up in and out of homelessness. I followed her and her family in New York City and thought it was a story about homelessness, only to find that it was a story about so many other things, for which homelessness was kind of an invitation into understanding these other broader systems and histories. And I just want to point out that the word hope is in both of our titles. And you were talking about your husband saying he should write a cookbook. There's also this great line in your prologue about your mother, who every time you tell her what the book is about, she responds with, "You should just write a love story." And I actually think that you have written a love story, because there are so many unseen miracles that play out on the ground in vulnerable communities like the ones that we've written about. And your book is really hard to put down. And part of the reason, what Beth was referring to earlier, is I have a personal connection to it because I lost my brother to addiction not a year ago even.
I'm sorry.
And so harm reduction would have, I think, saved him. And so it's just really, really important. It's a really important message.
So hard.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you say in Raising Lazarus, Beth, or you quote people talking about how if we can agree that substance use disorder is a disease and not a, personal failing, how absurd it is, to imagine that you would just tell someone to, like, with cancer, to just, like, wait till they hit rock bottom and then they'll sort it out, we treat this thing that's a disease as this personal failing, and it has this devastating impact, even though there's all this evidence,
Right, pretty basic things that can be done, but they go against this narrative we've been fed about the war on drugs, and that these people deserve to be incarcerated rather than offered treatment. Like 85% of the people in our prisons and jails have substance use disorder.
Yeah.
But we build up this huge machine of policing and prisons. Now we have private prisons, and it's going to take a lot of work to unwind that, to get to a point where we once were, as recently as like the early 70s, where we put most of the addiction money went to treatment than rather incarceration. And we need to achieve balance with that again.
Yeah, that was shocking to me. And under no one other than Richard Nixon that happened.
Yeah, right before he started Just Say No, or the war on drugs, which then led to Reagan and Just Say No.
So you, in Dopesick, you talk about how at that point, overdose was one of the leading causes of, I forget if it was accidental death, or was one of the leading causes of death in America, and that at the time, this is around 2016, 17, epidemiologists were worrying that, we were going to see a spike up into like 250 overdose deaths a day. And then COVID came, and what's happened to the epidemic since then?
Well, it's been harder hit in some communities than others, but the first year deaths were up 30 to 40% in most communities. And so you saw for COVID, like, we turned civic center parking lots into testing, places people get tested. We started telehealth, and that actually ended up helping people in addiction, because a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, the really distressed communities that I write about, don't have a way to get, they live out in the country and they don't have a way to get to treatment. And so the telehealth actually helped them. But as one doctor that I talk about in Lazarus said, he started noticing, he said it was great because I can see into people's homes now. But as COVID got worse and people were losing their jobs, then they're Zooming him from the car, and the kids are doing Zoom school in the back seat, and they're checking into hotels to take a shower on the weekend. And, this idea of all these barriers were really killing people. And if there's an act in the Senate right now called the MAT Act, which would basically make treatment more available, because all doctors would then be able to prescribe these life-saving drugs rather than just the 8% currently who have bothered to become waivered to be prescribers for this. So I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah. Andrea, Beth talked about, sticking with a difficult subject kind of longer than she anticipated. And not dissimilarly, you started Invisible Child as this 1-year series for the Times and then spent, another 7 years with Dasani and her family?
It's almost a decade, actually. It was 9 years. So 8 years of sort of full-time reporting, but then I have a very hard time letting go of anything. And so many, many final edits in when I'm sure my publisher was like, totally done with any attempt at a tweak. I still had my reporter hat on, I think, until I still do. I mean, it's very hard to let go of a story. But anyway, so it was basically 9 years, because the last event that is alluded to in the book happened in 2021. So yeah, 2012 to 2021.
And what made you stick with them all that time?
People, I think, sometimes assume that this was like a really horrible thing to witness for so many years, the struggles of this family. And a lot of what they went through was life-changing for me. It was devastating to watch, and that's true. But I like to think of the sort of emotional through line of the book, and this relates to my own experience as well as a person in their lives, as a reporter. That through line really was one of joy. And I think that is the pulse of the story. It's what keeps it moving, and it's what kept me sort of rooted in and hooked, for lack of a better word. And they are really magnetic people, and I just felt mostly happy to be with them and actually really lucky. And it was, I mean, they're people worthy of a book. I mean, this book, it's long. It's the length of a presidential biography, and I believe her life is worth every bit as much. And so the last passage I wrote comes sort of towards the beginning, and I really resisted writing it, but a colleague of mine said, you need a nut graph, like the book version of what we say, reporters, like to kind of, here's why this story matters. I was like, I don't need that. The book is, it's obvious. I mean, people will get it. No, you do. You actually need to ground the reader. And so I started to look for examples, and, among many heroes is, of course, Robert Caro. And in the first of the LBJ books, he wrote this passage that did just that. It was something like, I'm going to probably botch this, but to know Lyndon Baines Johnson, to understand the character of the 36th President of the United States of America, is to understand the character of the nation, or something like that. And so in a very much sort of deliberate way of saying her life is worth every bit as much, I did write this passage. It's the final passage, but it comes in the first section of the book. To understand Dasani, LaShawn, Joni Coates, to watch her grow up is to reckon with the city of New York and beyond its borders with America itself. So I feel like it took all those years and that passage just kind of lays out for me what I struggle to put into one sentence, but it's 5 paragraphs long, but sort of why she matters, like why her story. But it's not just that her story matters so hugely for what it says about everything from race in America to poverty to class to barriers to the flaws of our understanding or our myth of the American dream, the idea that we do live in a meritocracy when what you see playing out on the ground is so different. But it's also, so all those things are true, but it is just that they were riveting to be around. And I'm sure you'll relate to this, Beth, but they just made me laugh all the time. And I think humor is, somebody said this, someone once told me it was Freud, but I could not find proof of it.
It's always Freud, right?
I don't know who said it, but that humor is one of the highest forms of coping.
And intelligence, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of intelligence for sure. Yeah.
I think it was Groucho Marx.
Yeah.
You said so many things I want to pick up on. Although I did reminded me that you also quote Robert Caro about, which relates to both of your books. Was it Time is Truth?
Time equals truth. He said that in the New York Times Magazine interview, and I thought that's it, because I would add time plus trust equals truth, but because it takes time to get people to trust you, right? And so when I start a project and I don't know that I'm just going to be writing about one person, not one family or whatever. My new book is more like a kaleidoscope of 5 or 6 different localities.
Yeah.
And kind of coming back and forth to them, and as well as this legal case against Purdue Pharma. But when I start out and I don't know which are going to be in the 5 or 6, I always just say, look, I'm going to be really transparent. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. I'm never going to lie to you. I hope you'll never lie to me. And before the end, I will give you an opportunity to, I'll fact check what I wrote about you. And if I got something wrong, I hope you'll tell me, or if you think such and such wasn't fair, which we don't do that much as newspaper reporters. It's kind of frowned on. But I think if I'm spending 2 years with a family, like I did with Tessa's family for Dopesick, and it's really important that if her story is in my voice, or her mother's story, that they've given so much to me. They've given me all this time, all this heartache, that I am totally transparent with it. How about you? What do you say to them at the beginning?
That's such a good question. I mean, I really didn't have a great roadmap for this relationship. I think if I had told myself, you're going to spend the next near decade on this, I would have just bailed. I would like to think I wouldn't have. I would have done the valiant thing. But I think in retrospect, I mean, it just took possession of me in a way that was necessary, but I had very little guidance, because to your point, I mean, the newsroom operates, in a very practical way under a set of protocols that were designed at a different time. And so like in our reporter handbook, there's this section called Relations with Sources that literally reads like someone from the Mad Men era wrote it. It's like, you may enjoy a round of golf with your sources, but be aware that it could, present the appearance of coziness or something. And it's all
Only
about these
one
rules.
martini.
Yeah, one martini and you have to pay for it. And the thing is, like, these rules are important, and they're meant to protect the integrity of the newsroom and all that. But what if, so we're allowed to take our sources out to eat, we must pay, therefore, we're not going to be corrupted. Okay, but what if food is the form of transaction, because the person you're talking to is hungry? Like I just felt like I was feeling my way through this completely new and foreign world. And so I didn't use words like off the record. I expect them to know. Most people I've written about, and I think probably, well, you do an amazing hybrid sort of kind of reporting where you take on power, but then you're also on the ground with change makers and people like Tim Noah, is that his name? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, but those folks, I mean, for me, I spend so much time with people who've never had anything, never been interviewed. So I told them in the very beginning, we know what private is. You know what private is. I know what private is. If you tell me something is private, then that means I cannot use it. And that was clear to them. And I cannot recall, maybe once or twice, I can think of 2 things, and they were irrelevant to the story, where that ever happened. So there was just this, trust is such a strange thing, isn't it? I think you can talk your best game as a reporter, and it doesn't matter as much as what happens outside of language, in a way. Like,
right, just your showing up. And yes. Didn't you say, I listened to our long form podcast this weekend, which I totally recommend. It was so good.
We listened to each other's podcasts in preparation. I listened to
We're
2
fangirls.
Yeah. We've been in conversation now for a good
but we
while.
just met.
Yeah. True.
But you were talking about, you felt like they really trusted you when the mother saw you laughing with them
Yeah.
at a situation. Like,
Yeah.
Like they got who the heart of you was.
Yeah, they were observing me probably even more closely than I was observing them. And in part, this is because they're just really smart and sensitive people, like anyone would be, maybe some more than others, cuts across class, education, all other kinds of other things. But it's also because they're coming from a community that is predominantly of color and poor. They have had to gird themselves against massive surveillance and monitoring. And so the most remarkable thing I think about them was the fact that they allowed themselves to be vulnerable with me, when being vulnerable in their world was often a dangerous thing. Yeah. But that took a lot of
How
time
many
out.
years in was that where they could be really vulnerable?
I mean, I think it kind of happened outside of time. I know Robert Kerr, I think a lot of his stuff is, he was working as an historian in documents, and I think that's why you added trust. Time plus trust equals truth, because you're with these people, right? And so, but it's almost like dog years. I don't know, like 1 year together might have felt like 7. I mean, so many things happened that I'll never be able to unsee, things I saw that I cannot. And so I think that that's also part of it, is when you go through something together, and I'm not going through it with them. I'm there as a witness, but I'm there, and I'm of course feeling a lot. I think as reporters, also in the newsroom, we're sort of told or wired to be afraid of our feelings a little bit. Like, you got to guard against that. Don't get too close. Don't get, because as if emotions are going to corrupt our ability to be clear-eyed and balanced and fair and even,
Well, it's very
strong.
male still. Still.
What about if emotions are not just an impediment or detriment, but actually are not those things, but are instrumental, essential, right? To like elevating the work. Actually, they're like a guide. They're part of your
Elevating empathy, which is
Yes.
how we know
Right.
the world is safe for difference. When we tell stories that elevate empathy, it helps people understand, which is why it's so terrible that the media outside of New York and Washington and Chicago is just in a perilous decline. But that's another subject.
Well, it's interesting what you said about emotion, because one thing that really struck me about Raising Lazarus, and I feel like this sentence coming from a man is very loaded, so I just want to say it clearly, I think it's really fantastic, is that Raising Lazarus is a really emotional book. Like, I feel your anger, like kind of seething on every page.
Really?
And in a really powerful way, that I was wondering exactly what you were saying about sort of being told in newsrooms to sort of shut that off. If you felt that, if that was a deliberate choice, or if it was just kind of what you needed to
be
do.
angry?
Yeah.
I love your use of italics, I will say.
Give me an example.
You'll say, I can't, I'm going to have to look at
This is why I bring the books on stage. Forgive all my
I'm gonna
scribbles
find
and
one.
notes in there.
It's like, I'm just remembering this from right in the very beginning, but in the past 2 decades, overdose deaths have quintupled, is in italics. It's you can feel, I can feel you as a person reading this. Yeah.
When I finished the draft but hadn't yet written the epilogue, well, for a while we had, I don't know if Vanessa's here, my editor. Are you here? Yay! So we had, Vanessa will recall that we had 2 epilogues, and she's like, just need one. But we were still working out what the last page was going to be. And I sent the book to a novelist friend in Appalachia, Robert Guy, who is he's also an activist in this space. Like, he uses art and storytelling and theater as a way to gather the oral history of the places first ravaged by OxyContin, and they make theater out of it. It's really cool. And I've written about him, and I adore him, and so I sent it to him because nobody knows as much about this world as Robert. And he said, well, it's good. I've got some notes. But he said, dude, you have written 2 books about the opioid crisis. I don't want you to take me to another damn place at the end. I want you to stop telling me what you see and to tell me what you think. And I was like, ooh, because we aren't allowed to do that. And so Lena on my team at Little Brown, she read it and she goes, "Oh, Beth is in the room" at the end, because I was just like, this person doing harm reduction who's 88 years old and still working 12 hours a day counseling people works too many fucking hours, and she's worried about her lights being cut off while the Sackler's lights bill is paid for 20 years in advance or whatever, 200 years. And so that was like a little bit of taking my journalist hat on and just like being there with the reader, because I am like, this is my second book. Like, it's just getting worse. It's not getting better. What can I do? Like, take out a billboard on Times Square? Like, I just have to, like, I had to be angry at that point.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. It felt right for the book. You talked, Andrea, about sort of building trust and building this relationship, and in your afterword, which I love, by the way, because I think it's where we really get to see you and your experience of the book, and it was really fascinating. You said something that I just wondered if both of you had thought about, which is sort of this, you wrestling with these professional guidelines and imagining how Dasani and her family saw it, and that, you're writing about their homelessness and their poverty and not having food, and you're getting paid for it.
Right.
And so I don't know, or could you just talk a little bit about how you wrestled with that? And I'm curious, Beth, also, if that's something in a similar way that you wrestled with, but how did you wrestle with that?
So I'm still wrestling with it. I found some more guidance in academic circles. I think that we've seen, with ethnographers and anthropologists, a lot of kind of just really honest thinking around the ethics of this work. I mean, they're a kind of good parallel because, again, it's their job to be in the field. In the beginning, it was my job. I reported to the New York Times, so that made it easier in ways. Like, I'm just doing my job. I'm here to write this story. They're the ones setting the rules. But then once you're off on a book and it's just you, it really creates a space to consider these rules from maybe other perspectives. And I guess the way I wrestled with it is I go to something that this wonderful ethnographer, Leon Fuji, said to me before she passed away, but she worked with genocide victims in Rwanda and did a lot of really complicated and disturbing kind of interviews and fieldwork and stuff. And she said, she described the relationship between the so-called observer and the person who's observed, I mean, you could say expert, journalist, whatever, and the subject, as having a built-in asymmetry of power that is going to be there no matter what. And the idea that it's going to dissipate or go away is really dangerous, and you have to be just aware that it won't. And your job, it's sort of like the price you pay for the privilege of being in their lives, is to constantly wrestle with that. And so where did that lead me? It led me, and I think that this isn't necessarily the answer for every journalist. We give up a lot to do the work that we do. It's hard. We don't get paid a lot. It can take years, and it can
hurt your family time.
Yes. So nonetheless, I felt it was absolutely essential to share in any proceeds and really benefit the family as hugely as I possibly could with this book. And so I've outlined that on my website. And like prize money and stuff like that, I've given to them because I felt that I got the prize, but they get the money. It's, I mean, it's the right thing.
Yeah.
I will say that for Dasani, the biggest prize of all was that Barack Obama liked the book. She was jumping up and down on the table. That was really exciting.
That's so cool.
Yeah. But I'd love to hear Beth's take on this.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think immediately about this ethical dilemma. There was one kind of shitty review of Dopesick that said I got too close to the people. And this guy was talking about this moment in the story where I'm following this young woman, Tess, around, and she's been in her addiction for 5 years. She's a young mother, and I meet her, and she's like all on board. Give her the transparency talk, and I'll always tell you where I am, because at the beginning I wasn't sure if she was even going to be in the book. And then at one point, I've been following her for about like a year. What I did at the beginning was at the end of the first interview, which was like 3 hours long, I said, well, I'd like to just kind of check in once a week. How would that be? And she said, well, I have to go to these NA meetings. It's a condition of getting my medicine, my buprenorphine. She had to get her little paper signed, which was a stigmatizing thing. And I need a ride. Can you give me a ride? And I said, well, that'd be great. It'd be a great weekly check-in. I'll record our interviews with your permission on my phone in the car. And, sometimes even her baby went with us. Sometimes I walked the baby around when he was fussy so she could participate. So I did that. That helped me. I told the reader I did that. But when she needed me, she called me once to pick her up from a trap house. And I didn't see the message immediately because I was working on taxes, and I just didn't see the text. And then I saw it like an hour and a half later, and I was like, shit, I want to go help her. But so I talked to my husband, who has better judgment in the moment than I do always. And he said, you can't do that. You don't know what the situation is. Yeah. Call her mother instead. Call her peer recovery person. So we did that. But I just felt like there's something amiss about that, where when I need her, I'm right there. But when she needs me, I'm not. But so Walt Harrington, who was this great magazine writer for the Washington Post for many years, has this book called Intimate Journalism. And he said once that, you're not going far enough unless you're right on that line, and I think about that a lot. What's the line? And the line moves. The line shifts.
Why didn't I read this book before?
I'll send it to you. It's so good.
Yes.
And unless you're wrestling every day with these issues. And so when I really wrestle and I'm not sure, I just tell the reader.
Yes.
Like I feel like I'm going to be transparent.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's also my role. I also just seeing the line, just continuing to remembering the line, that there is this line, and are you right up against it? Are you not? And talking about that line with the people you're writing about. Yeah. Keeping that on. Isn't this weird? I mean, I remember Dasani at one point just being like, your job, it's just weird. Okay. You've been around.
How'd you feel then? Then how'd you feel?
Yeah. Well, also just like years in, she's like, how long are you going to?
Look at this, even a Bernstein bookmark.
All right, placement.
I remember her. Her little sister was great. She was 3 years old, and one day she saw me. I think I had actually slept on their floor in my sleeping bag the night before. And she goes, every time I see you, you in my house. And I was like, that is what I do. I wish I could just summarize it like that on my business card. Like, I'm in
your house. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what is immersion? But my friend is Eliza Griswold actually has a great way of describing it. She's to people who don't understand what we do. It's like, imagine you're driving and someone comes up and knocks on the window, and you roll down the window and they say to you, can I get in the backseat of your car until like Baltimore? And you're like, fine, get in the backseat of my car. And then they're driving. And like a year later, they're in Albuquerque or something. And they're like, you're still in the backseat of my car. Get out. I mean, it's just a really weird job. We don't know where it's going to go. You said you cast a wide net, and you're following all these sort of different really interesting strands of, and making those strands come together in this one story. But you don't know that in the beginning. It's such a gamble, right? And
no, and I just go with like really what moves me. And I had kind of a crap intro the first time around this, and my editor Vanessa said, I said, I don't think this is it. She goes, I don't think this is it. And she said, you do your best writing when you write about someone you really admire. And I thought, oh, you are so right. And so I thought, who do I most admire in this book? And it's this nurse practitioner who's worked all day at his FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center, sliding scale. And at night he goes out and he's under bridges, he's in encampments, he's meeting people next to the dumpster at McDonald's to get them into systems of care. And so I was like, that he has to be the beginning, because I've never almost never met a more selfless person.
I mean,
But he's
extraordinary.
figured it out, and how do we scale the rest of that up? So that's what I try to spend the rest of the book kind of documenting. But the other thing I want to ask you, I'm sorry.
No, please. This is what I was hoping for.
You don't know what the response to the people you're writing about
Yeah.
is going to be, and you can't predict it. So did you ever have anything where you felt that, I don't know, something you're writing, maybe when you wrote the piece first in the Times, if
Well,
there was
like-
going to be feedback that hurt Dasani or her family?
You know, with newspaper stories, I found, and I do long form, so these tend to be stories that take a few months at least, and so you've really gotten to know the person, pretty well. So usually there's three reactions. There's their initial reaction, which is either they hate it, they love it, or something in between. Then there's the reaction they're giving you based on all the reactions that are coming at them from other people about the thing. And then the third place is usually where they land, which might be somewhere in between. But, it's funny also listening to you talking about like being able to write about someone that you admire. And it's so funny, right? How certain things can ignite us as writers and other things can get in the way. And I think with Dasani's mother, who is a really fascinating, very rich character, but also really complicated, I was afraid in the beginning and I was holding back in the writing because I just knew so much and I had seen so much and she'd given me her blessing, but I was afraid that people would judge her too quickly. The reader would somehow turn against her. And then the best advice I got on that was from a fiction writer, Jennifer Gilmore, who told me that the rule that she holds for fiction writing is that the more you love your character, the less the reader will. And the harder you are on your character, the kinder the reader will be. And I think it's so true with fiction, right? And I do think ultimately that it helped Chanel that all the cards were on the table in her depiction. I read passages to her in part because I was trying to get inside her head, and so I do feel like she was very prepared for when the book came out. And I read the whole book to Dasani. It took 5 days. I was telling you this.
Did you change a lot after that?
So it was a fact check process. No, it was a lot of little things that sort of, I think, fine tuning. Just maybe the way I captured the mood of something. It was minor things. There were no factual changes really that because we'd been, but also as we were talking about before, I geek out with so much stuff. I had hundreds of hours of audio and video and stuff. So it was the things that I was writing were based on not just on memory, but that, right? And so it wasn't so much about facts as presentation and tone and
Tone, yeah.
I think we're going to get some questions from the audience in a minute, but I wanted to ask you both about a line that's actually one of the epigraphs of your book, Beth, which is from the writer Anne Pancake, who says, "In times like these, you have to grow big enough inside to hold both the loss and the hope." And that really spoke to me about both of your books. And I just wondered from both of you how you grew big enough to hold both of those in your work.
Do you want to go first?
no.
I don't know that it was a matter of growing big to hold it as it just was I found these people and they're kind of like Jesus on the planet. There's this one woman, Brooke, who is a Ryan White worker, and there was just this incredible day, I'll never forget it, where she's going out to tell 3 people who are unhoused that they have HIV, and she can't find them because they've been kicked out of their encampments. So we're going all over these homeless encampments in Charleston, West Virginia, which has the nation's most concerning HIV outbreak. And they've just made needs-based needle exchange illegal. The one thing that science says helps prevent HIV in this situation. And here's this woman just she's a peer, she's in recovery, she's working at the ragged edge of capacity. And before we can even get to the second person, we're going all around this man in a wheelchair who's dopesick. He's been picking maggots out of his feet earlier in the day. He's crying. He needs her help more. And so she sits at his feet in the dirt. This is the Jesus part. And she rips little packets of antibiotic ointment. She puts gloves on. She pats him. He's crying because it hurts so bad. And she's saying, "Oh, honey, it's okay. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And while this is all happening, the police come up and put an eviction notice on the homeless encampment on public property by a river. And this sex worker comes by, who is a friend of the guy in the wheelchair, and she gives him a Pepsi, and she says to Brooke, I was an LPN for 17 years, and that antibiotic ointment ain't gonna cut it, honey. And she says, and then I got married. And it's this funny moment, right? It's like, she's like, da-da-da, blah, blah, and then I got married. And so that moment, like, I love the kind of moment that has like a scene, something surprising, like, is Danny Strong here, by the way? No. So Danny Strong was the co-writer in Dopesick. And what I learned working on that show was like every scene should have a point, a turn, and a surprise. And which I had never thought, it's just like bare bones, the action. And so what I love about that scene is it does have both loss. It's so sad. It has the surprise is the humor of this moment where this sex worker that she knows, there's nothing you can tell her that she doesn't know about how fucked the situation is. And she delivers it so beautifully. And then the cop gives Kyle the eviction notice, and he goes like, he folds it in half, and he cartwheels it to the ground. And it's just like, and the whole thing is, Brooke says later in the car, like, I have to remind myself that all these people used to have a house just like us, and kids, and a partner, and they've just been put in this situation, and that we don't see the humanity in them. So I think, like, I do it because I was able to do this book because there was so much humanity in the people I was writing about and the way they were seeing the work. That helped a lot. I was really a mess after I finished Dopesick, but with this one, it was just much more hopeful. And I mean, it's still.
Wait, what do you mean a mess? You mean?
Oh, like my blood pressure went up. I went to my doctor.
But then you wrote another book. It was amazing. I mean, you're like really prolific. I don't think you're a mess at all.
No, I was a mess. I had to go to counseling. I had to get on antidepressants. I had to take blood pressure medicine for a while.
Yeah.
And that's when my husband said, write a cookbook. And I'm like, they're not going to pay me to write a cookbook. And so then I found a happier way into the story. It's not the whole story, but no book is. You know what I mean?
No book is. I don't know how we're doing on time. I love that answer so much. I feel like it speaks very much to things I would say. I guess all I would add is, are just really, it's similar to what you said, but I think, well, I don't feel I have the right to kind of get despondent. I've obviously witnessed so much, but it was a tremendous privilege to be given that trust and that access, and it is my duty, therefore, to hold space for it in order and absolutely feel hope at the same time. I mean, I was there the day that Dasani's siblings were removed from their parents. It happened in front of me on neglect charges, and so much of this book looks at these systems and how unjust they are. And that case in particular was really outrageous, and it destroyed their family. It just bulldozed the family, and so that was a life-changing event for me. But imagine what it was like for them. And so this is what I always tell people when they ask me about my own sort of personal relationship to their distress. I see it as an active witness, that book, more than anything else. And so, but. Yeah, let's see what other questions. I don't know how we are on time. So
we got a few minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to start with a real tough one. Where to get the recording pen?
Oh, you know what? They should be giving me a cut by now.
I feel
I'm
the
like,
same way
this
about
is
Wizard
ridiculous.
Wall. I
And
like always talk about that.
I mean, and it's glitchy, by the way, and it's not like the most stable company. I think it may be up for sale right now. It's called LiveScribe. I'm going to just be honest about it because nobody's sent me a new LiveScribe. No, it's okay. On Amazon, I think it's.
Is that one word, LiveScribe?
LiveScribe is one word, yeah.
Capital
No,
S?
it's cool. It's a good. No, it's capital L and then capital S, but one word. I love how specific you are.
Well, so here's a question for both of you that gets at a lot of the ambivalence that you deal with in your books. How do you bring the reader to a satisfactory ending when the subject may not have a clear resolution?
I'm not sure you do bring them to a satisfactory ending. I know the day that I witnessed the last scene in my book, and I wrote the ending, by the way, 3 different times, and all 3 endings, which are 3 different scenes, are in the book. It's just the 2 end specific chapters. So I was never really good at figuring out where the end was. But when it did happen, I recognized it. And it's funny because stepping back from that now, it was a family barbecue. It might have struck Dasani as no different from, it was quite ordinary, actually. And yet it braided together so many things that the book is about, and it felt like, from the outside looking in, the right place. I don't know that it was satisfying to the reader, though. I
love the way you end your book, by the way.
Thank you. I think I will say, and I've been thinking about the ending a lot lately, and talking about being, in the state of, chaos post book birth. I mean, so these things are things that we don't even think about. We don't have the space for as we're delivering this thing into the world. But then afterwards, you start to think about it. And one thing I've come to realize, at least for me, but I think it applies to other books, is that there's almost no vulnerable place in the book as the ending, because it's where the reader sees you as the writer letting go. It's you've chosen to step away, and there's an abdication in a way, like there's a kind of departure, and it's hard. I don't know. Was it hard for you to end yours?
Yeah, I had those 2 endings. I more like end it with, I say something like, history. I'm talking about the Sacklers, and I say something like, sorry. The litigation money is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Sacklers willfully created the crisis. They shamelessly lied to the healthcare community, enlisted their aid in carrying out a murderous rampage that has victimized hundreds of thousands of people in this country. We actually have 7 million people right now with opioid use disorder. History will judge them. History may forgive those who thought they were doing the right thing but were misled by those they've been trained to trust. But how we respond to the horrors that have resulted will determine how we are judged. And then I go on for maybe 2 more sentences that I probably could have just ended right there. But so that's a call to action, right? My first book, Factory Man, was about this heroic 3rd-generation furniture maker who took on China in a court of international trade to keep his factory going. And when I wrote the proposal, it was going to be this hero story. Of course, he was way more complicated than that. He was kind of an asshole. I said that on the first page. If he's anything, he's an asshole. And I mean, it just, the more you learn, the more complicated it gets. And so I had envisioned that the book would end with this great moment where he wins this international trade case. He's able to pump the money he gets back into his factory to save this town. It's true, but it's an outlier. Most of the people were like my mom when I was growing up and would lose her factory job because the economy tanked. She would picking up under the table work and, really, really struggling. And so I thought, no, this book has to end with the voices of the majority of people who, because the majority of people, their job didn't get saved. And that's why we have so much anger in this partly why we have so much anger in this country right now. And so there's this moment early on where I'm interviewing a former factory worker, and I compliment her necklace. She's got this beautiful Tiffany necklace.
I complimented your necklace.
You did. And she goes, oh, I bought that when I used to work at Tultex. It was a textile factory. And she said, when I worked at Tultex, I loved my job. I had such pride in my job. And I bought really nice things to last a long time, like this. And then she told me about how she was picking up under-the-table jobs, just like my mom had done. And she said, I was catering a party. The former CEO comes in, and she says to him, Mr. Frank, if Tultex were to open up today, and the only way I could get there to have my job back again would be to crawl on my belly like a snake, I would do it. And so that's kind of early in the book, and then at the end this thing happens, and I'm able to refer back to it. Because I think good endings leave lasting images in readers' mind. And if I can still feel that moment this is probably my favorite ending of one of my books, is like this person gives me a brick, and it's from an old factory, and it's warm like the sun, and I know that there are people out there who would crawl on their belly like a snake if they could have it all back. So I just think there's that image of what is the yearning in this community. It's the font of a lot of the despair we see now, and just that image. I don't know.
Yeah.
That emotion of that image.
You may have a sequel to Factory Man next.
I might.
Cards. Just saying.
So I have to say, you asked a lot of really amazing questions, and I'm sorry that we can't get to all of them. We're just about done, but I'm going to just ask one more, if that's okay. You've both written and talked about many oppressive systems, from policing to child welfare to treatment. Given the research that you've both done and the many stories that you've heard and were impacted by, do you believe that these systems can be reformed?
I'll just quickly say that in the very beginning of my time with this family, I would hear the parents in particular say things like, this is a modern version of slavery, or the system's working just as it's designed. And a lot of the time, this was surrounded by a lot of kind of conspiracy theory sounding things. Like the chorus around them was a lot of pitched arguments lacking in nuance. They were more nuanced when we would go deep inside these conversations. But I came around much later to seeing it very much from their perspective, having walked with them in it. That's really how I would describe what my job is to be with the people. And the thing that I think connects my book to Beth's is this notion that people who have struggled, survived, suffered from the very things that these systems are supposed to be addressing need to be a part of the solution, that it must come from the ground up. And so just a quick example, Chanel Dasani's mother was, lost custody of her kids for years for these accusations of neglect in a system that has nearly 500,000 children in the foster care system in this country predominantly are black or brown and poor, and most of them are there for neglect, not abuse. And this is a system that lacks due process, and where parents are not informed of their rights. They don't know that a federal court order is needed, for example, before they allow a caseworker into their homes. And so she came up recently with the idea of creating an app to just be able to pull up on her phone that gives her rights, or gives parents their rights, that allows them to quote the law, and so these kinds of innovations, it requires a tremendous amount of innovation to survive as a poor person, number one. There's so many things we could say about poverty that I learned, that so many ideas I had were upended by just being in that daily experience. The idea that poor people, for example, don't want to work. I mean, if you cannot, you're always working if you're poor. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't necessarily look like work. Yeah. So, I think that's sort of my takeaway as a non-policymaker. It's the idea that they must be a part of the solution. And then there's a million things we could talk about that go more deep into the weeds. But I'll turn to you for that.
That's a very harm reduction idea, that they have to be part of the system in order to help it. A lot of this litigation money is coming down to these commissions that have no people with lived experience on them, and it's just going to get frittered away unless those folks have a voice. So I don't know. I totally agree with what you said. And I also, something Brian Stevenson told me when the Equal Justice Initiative, who wrote Just Mercy, amazing person. I interviewed him for Dopesick, and he just like nailed it in the middle of the interview. He said, we've gotten so hopeless about all these issues. We have to have hope. And I don't mean namby-pamby hope, but like real gritty hope. Because we can't fix these issues until we get the people who are involved, and also we educate ourselves, which is why books like yours are so important. We can become empowered, but it's easier to look the other way. It's easier not to see the unseen, as Tim calls them. And so that's why I think it's so important that we have people out there telling the stories of the unseen.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think it actually, a friend of mine recently said, who is a social worker, that it actually requires in today's climate in America of so much divisiveness and polarization and anger, that to hope is an act of tremendous vulnerability in a way. And you have to really be vulnerable in order to believe that things can change. And that's, I think, part of the work as well. It's allowing yourself to lower the guard in that respect.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you both for writing two of my most impactful reading experience of the year that let us see the unseen, like you said, Beth. Just really incredible works of writing. So thank you so much for being here. And please, everyone who, is here, go get the books. Beth and Andrea will sign them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aidan.
Thank you so much. Thanks.